Good evening and welcome. Tonight on the show, we'll talk about the notorious USP saga. If you missed the past few months of reports, here's a summary. In early May this year, accusations were leveled against the former president and vice chancellor of the University of the South Pacific, alleging serious cases of mismanagement and abuses of process. A document outlining these allegations went viral, and at the heart of it all was the newly appointed vice chancellor and president of USP, Professor Pal Ahluwalia. He tabled the same allegations in a USP Council meeting in May, and FICAC had undertaken initial investigations. Later, FICAC ceased investigations, honoring a request from the USP Council to engage an independent investigator, BDO New Zealand. The investigation was conducted and the reports were released in August. Professor Chandra has since maintained that the reports vindicate him. And tonight on the show, we take a closer look at the allegations and the findings of the report in an exclusive interview with the former VC and president of USP, Professor Rajesh Chandra. Sir, thank you very much for joining us on the show tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Pravesh, for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about these things.
So to open up the show for tonight, let's talk about the allegations in general. Now, as we all know, we all have access to the summary of the BDO report. And after the report was released, however, you must have noticed, we noticed that USP did not come out with any notable statements of vindication either to you or the other people accused in the papers. Now, you've taken active measures and said the report vindicates me. But what is your view of where things stand at the moment?
Well, I think that the FICAC investigation clearly did not find any fraud or abuse of office or corruption. Because after months of investigation, if there was even a hint of any of those, FICAC would have prosecuted by now. Mm-hmm. And I know from correspondence from them to various people that they did not find any of those.
Right.
Now, the BDO report has not been made available to me, so I do not know the details of it. But what came out in the public summary does note that the Vice Chancellor's decisions were within the delegations. So essentially, my take of all of that is that there is no fraud or abuse of office or corruption. These were the big things that people were talking about. Mm-hmm. All the decisions of the Vice Chancellor were within the statute covering the Vice Chancellor's actions, very detailed delegations. They were covered by a provision in the staff ordinance that gave the Vice Chancellor the authority and the responsibility to vary the terms and conditions of his staff where it was in the university's interest. There are basic principles of making decisions. That is, you need to be driven by good faith. Mm-hmm. You need to do due diligence. You are looking at making the decision in the interest of the university. And basically, you are driven by wanting to deliver what the council has set out for you to do. So all of those have been diligently observed.
I mean, so your main response, I guess, is that everything that you did was within the powers that were granted to you by the appropriate regulations.
Yes.
And so, I mean, since we're discussing, we would like to get into...
I just want to carry on a little bit. Having said all of that, the decisions are actually made by committees. Mm-hmm. So, for instance, appointments of people are made by committees. The Vice Chancellor has the ability to make short-term 12-month appointments, but the main appointments are made by committees. So when he's talking about decisions of committees, there were decisions that were made by other members of senior management who have line responsibilities, and there were decisions made by senior management. So it's not like the Vice Chancellor is making all those decisions. So I'm talking about the ones that I was involved in, and that is what. Having said all of that, there is no question that the university is engaged in a process of continuous improvement. and by its own procedures is required to review all of the policies within 3 years. There are hundreds of policies, so obviously sometimes it takes time. So I have no issues that on balance some of those policies need to be reviewed.
So when you say that the committees do make the decisions on making appointments, we were of course going to look at some of the appointments later on. You say that only the Vice Chancellor is allowed to make short-term decisions, but would you not be, in your position back then, would you not be, shall we say, overseeing some of the decision-making processes of the committee?
No, the committees have their own authority to make those decisions. Sometimes I am part of it, sometimes I'll chair them, sometimes I'm not. What you have to realize that in a university, there is a cascading system of empowerment and delegation. So for instance, if you're appointing very low level of people, then there is a completely different kind of committee. Then within the faculty, some decisions will be made led by the dean. Then there will be some that will be led by the deputy vice chancellor, the vice president, and there will be some that is made by, chaired by the vice chancellor. Yes, the vice chancellor has overall responsibility for ensuring that the systems are working, and for that we engage a number of audits and reviews to make sure that all of that is happening.
So when news first broke out, I think it was the Pro-Chancellor and Chair of USP Council, Mr. Winston Thompson, who expressed his disappointment with the handling of the information. He called it an unfair and harmful disclosure of unverified information, because there were so many members, individual members, who were specifically named in those allegations. How do you think that the executive committee played its role in dealing with these allegations? And we'd like to get into the specifics of what happened internally.
Well, to the extent that I know, because I was obviously not in the executive committee, but the executive committee received those 11-page document, and it basically received it late, and it said that what we really need is to verify those claims, and directed that the Director of Assurance and Compliance verify those and make available those allegations to those who were mentioned. Now, this is an essential and basic requirement of natural justice as well as the laws of Fiji. So EC did the right thing at that point. What happened after that is a big problem, because between the Vice Chancellor and the Director of Assurance and Compliance, this document was referred to FICAC. Now, what EC had said, that once you have verified it, given the opportunity to those people, then you bring all of that back for EC to develop, to consider and to make decisions. That's normal for the university. That's an internal process. Now, all of that was hijacked, and essentially somebody was insubordinate and submitted this document to FICAC. So there is a clear case of insubordination there, and that's for the EC, I think, to deal with that. Now,
if we could
yes,
put a
please.
pin in that, it's time for us to go to a break. When we come back, we'll discuss some of the specifics of the allegations in the papers. We'll be right back. So now we'd like to get into some of the specific allegations that were laid, but we'll allow you to finish off your comments on how the information was handled by the university.
Yes, I think it's very important. There are a couple of things relating to how it was dealt with that are crucial for the university to deal with. The first is that when somebody takes decisions in the lawful pursuit of their duties, the institution has a duty of care to them, particularly because they benefited from that. They did not provide any adverse views around it. And so I think that EC and Council should have done better to meet their duty of care. To me, as the person who did bulk of the, led the university for the 10.5 years, but also to a large number of people who, in my view, were innocent and listed in that category and whose reputations were hugely damaged. Now, how were they damaged is because what should have been a very tightly controlled internal process, very sensitive, the information was leaked. And as you know, when that information is leaked, it goes over the internet, social media, and it goes everywhere. Millions of people read what is a one-sided, unverified allegation. And I think that right throughout this process, that natural justice and unfairness to the people involved has been compromised. And the university really needs to investigate the leak, because this is a document authored by the new Vice Chancellor, and it was left in the custody of two people. It was left in the custody of the Vice Chancellor and in the custody of the Director of Assurance and Compliance. And I think the EC should have a very strong interest in determining who is accountable for that leak.
Right. If we talk about the document itself, outlining a range of issues, including speedy appointments and renewals, questionable payments and remunerations to members of staff. I mean, it's a very comprehensive document, dubious appointments and promotions as well. To all of these in general, what is your response?
My response is that if one understands the university, and if one understands that I carried the responsibility of the Vice Chancellor to 31st December, and if anything had happened at the university, only I was accountable. And therefore, we decided to appoint, and I should say that appointments, from the time that Professor Ahluwalia arrived at USP as a designated Vice Chancellor, he sat in all of those appointments. So there was nothing hidden. But I made an acting appointment to a vice president. Now, that had gone to the council, and the council had basically said, we've taken a long time to get to this short list. Meet with the Vice Chancellor, Pro-Chancellor, and the Vice Chancellor, designated Vice Chancellor. See if you agree with this shortlisting. If you agree and you make a decision, the Pro-Chancellor was delegated to approve it on behalf of the council. If, however, you couldn't agree, then it will go back to the EC. Now, but it said that if this process is delayed, the Vice Chancellor is authorized and has the delegation to make an acting appointment. So all those acting appointments, and particularly that one, because we were under huge pressure to finish a lot of work, to deal with HR, and we basically felt that we needed to put somebody experienced in that place. So there is no issue around that. Were they done with the right committees? Yes. The renewal, for instance, of Dr. Hasmukh Lal, Professor Ahluwalia was a member of that committee. He took part in all of those. He preferred a 3-year contract instead of a 5-year renewal. The committee all agreed. The committee waited for him to have another conversation with Dr.
So the repeated, consistent assertion that in many critical decisions he was not consulted or he was not adequately consulted, do you agree with that assertion?
No, not at all. Because he got appointed in May. Now, if a Vice Chancellor is appointed in May and he wants to determine everything from May, the university won't run. We had some obligations to finish those. To the extent that we had an opportunity, he was involved. Now, consultation doesn't mean his agreement. there was no appointment that I made without consulting people, and particularly after consulting the Pro-Chancellor who represents the Council. So I totally reject that.
Okay, so let's look at some things that were mentioned in the report.
Yes.
Referring to the paper itself. There's a lot of mention of allowances and bonuses in the allegations. Let's look at one of the examples, the IAS example. Position of Deputy Director was left vacant and the responsibility of that position was taken up by the Director. Regulations allow a responsibility allowance of up to 50% to be paid, and this allowance was paid to the Director of IAS for 4 years. There was no notable attempt to advertise or to fill that position, and the position had been requested by the Director in the first place. Talk to us about that. What's your response to that?
Okay, well, all of that is totally erroneous. Factually, that position was never recommended by the Director. It was recommended by Professor Bill Alversberg, the late Bill Alversberg, when he was the Director. And as he was coming close to his retirement, and he looked at the expanding business, he wanted a deputy to be appointed. It is something in the Faculty of Science and Technology. It went there, and a recommendation came to me, and I approved the creation of that post. So that's completely wrong that the director who is now left had anything to do with it. Now, the director that got appointed was hugely successful person. We tried to advertise the deputy director position twice, because when that allegation was made, I went back and checked, because I don't deal with those. They were being dealt with by the deputy vice chancellor and the dean. And I was told that it was advertised twice. We couldn't get that position. And the director made the reasonable request that if I am going to do what I used to do as a deputy, and now I'm doing the work as a director, that he should get some responsibility allowance. And that was agreed by all the people who are involved. It's not the Vice Chancellor's decision alone, although I might or might not have approved it. So I think that that is pure figment of imagination and the lack of checking with the relevant people. If he had checked with Professor Armstrong, his deputy, who was looking after that, he would have been told all of that.
And the processes followed even before or during when all of this information was being collected is something that I believe we should discuss, but we'll get into that when we come back from our next break. So now we'd like to get back into the discussion in relation to staff appointments. And although we do understand that allowances and bonuses is something that the paper discusses quite a bit, we should get back to that eventually. But talk to us about some of the staff appointment processes. In your opinion, does USP place enough checks and balances on the way that it's appointed? I mean, we do understand that the regulations does allow the Vice Chancellor to exercise whatever powers he's given. But do you think that this policy framework is the right sort of framework?
Okay, let me say that the appointment process at USP is a sophisticated and rigorous process. The focus on the Vice Chancellor's ability to make one-year appointments or temporary appointments is actually ignoring the fact that the bulk of the appointments of the university are done through the committees. And there's a very strict policy about which positions are advertised within countries and regionally and internationally. There's also a delegated process of making those appointments, because as I was explaining earlier, the Vice Chancellor is involved in some of them, but some of them are chaired by the Deputy Vice Chancellor, the Vice President, some of them are chaired by deans, some of them are chaired by the directors. So I would say that on the whole, the USP appointments process is a model that some other universities are adopting. However, having said all of that, we are always wanting to make sure that the process follows what is required to be done. And in fact, I had a deep interest in that, because some years ago, I used to send the Director of Assurance and Compliance the foundation director of assurance compliance, to sit in the appointments committees to give senior management assurance that the checks and balances were working. Because in all of these appointments committees, there are people from different schools, from different faculties, and the idea is that there will be enough independence and checks and balances.
And the policy frame, if I can interrupt you, the policy framework is something that the report, the BDO report, addresses quite clearly. In fact, at one point, the report says USP's, and this is in relation to remuneration policies, I should mention. USP's current policy framework is overly complex, fragmented, outdated, and generally isn't fit for purpose. Do you agree with that assessment?
Well, I would say that it is complex. I mean, the university is a hugely more complex system than most people are used to. It is in need for remuneration, the policies are in need for review, and that should be done. But to the extent that those policies exist, the decisions are being made within those.
Okay.
Yeah, so that is the... See, if you look at any of those policies, some Australian universities will think that we are too bureaucratic. They would have hugely more authority for the Vice Chancellor. This is one thing I want to say. I have been over the 10 years to dozens of universities. Vice Chancellors and former Vice Chancellors who are friends, and I keep on checking with them what kind of decision making they have. And in all of those, the Vice Chancellor has hugely more discretion to make decisions than at USP. We are quite circumscribed in that. So yes, those policies are complex. They need to be simplified, and it is for council now to undertake that.
Let's look at some of the allegations that were made. This is in a report that was done by Island Business. They have stated, of course, that it was made available to them, a document regarding those allegations, and it's questioning at least a few of the appointments that were made by you in your capacity as VC. One was the post-retirement renewal of an institute's director's contract, and it states that USP's post-retirement policy only allows for 3 one-year contract renewals. However, this had been done 6 times. Could you talk to us about, what was the driving factor behind appointments like that, and the rationale behind, appointments of deans, heads of schools, and all of that?
Okay. So at the end of the day, one has to keep the operations of the university going. So you take a very simple example. There was criticism that I had accepted a recommendation from the dean to renew the contract of Professor Eric Colvin as the head of School of Law. That came about because we had advertised the position of Pro-Vice Chancellor and Professor of Law for Emmalus campus 3 times, and we could not find a replacement. So what do we do? So the dean says, well, you've got a well-performing head of school. I recommend that we appoint him for 1 year while we re-advertise. So it's a very normal process. Now, as it turns out, Professor Ahluwalia has done exactly that. He has extended the contract of the same person for the same reason, that if you've got a semester coming, if you don't have any alternatives, then you engage the people who are still performing well but happen to be over a retirement age. Now, when the EC discussed the retirement age, it actually considered whether the retirement age should be abolished and whether it should be used in a more flexible way. It decided in the end that it should retain the retirement age, but gave very clear indication that people over 65 are still very productive, especially for a university that is struggling to recruit high-performing people. So they said that you can actually offer them longer-term contracts, provided they are in scarce areas. So I'm not sure which institute director they're talking about, but when you are facing a difficulty and you need to get your classes taught and you need to get the business done, and you are trying to achieve the outcomes in the strategic plan. I just want to explain the 2017 and 18. We had critical things that we needed to do. We needed to develop a new strategic plan. We needed to get our University Grants Committee funding approved. We needed to get the Australian partnership agreed, and we needed to get the New Zealand partnership agreed. If we had missed one of them, the university wouldn't have been able to have a budget in November, because you had to go to UGC. The UGC would not give you any money if you didn't have a plan. So you had to do a plan. And then you had to convince the ministers to give you money. You couldn't go to the Australian government without a plan. So we had to make sure that we did not lose critical people. And that was the main motivation.
I mean, because as you've explained, even in your editorial piece, that the actions that you took were legally sanctioned. And I guess the question that logically comes up then is, even if it is legally sanctioned, does that also mean that it's ethically sanctioned as well?
Yes. So I want to say that I did not rely on the fact that there is a legal sanction. We always looked at what was needed, what was in the interest of the university. Right. And to me, all of these policies are designed for an outcome. The outcome was deliver excellence, deliver the promise of the strategic plan. Now, what people need to understand is that university achieved 84% of implementation of a strategic plan. No Australian university, no New Zealand university achieved that. And we did that on roughly about half the per capita student income.
Right. If I could put a pin in that. It's time for us to go to break. When we come back, we'll discuss, among other things, the difficulty that USP has faced in recruiting and retaining its staff over the years. We'll be right back. Professor, in the last segment, we were talking about some of the driving factors behind the decisions that were taken during your term. And one of those that came out very clearly was the ability to retain staff. Would you care to finish your thought on that?
Yes. So the university has had difficulties, as have others, in recruiting and retaining excellent people. It's not about being able to get anybody. It's about people of the caliber who will deliver on the vision of excellence. So what that means is that once you get those people, you nurture them, you look after them, you reward them. And if there are administrative impediments, you attend to that. And we made sure that, and if any of them leave at a critical point, then you jeopardize the whole performance of the university. And as I said, in 2018, had we missed one of those, if we hadn't got the UGC funding or the strategic plan or the Australian funding, the university wouldn't really be in a position to have a budget. We had faced all of those difficulties when Professor Tar was there. We have very bad memories about that, and we just didn't want to go there. So it's driven by the need to do those. You also have to build a culture of excellence. Now that culture of excellence doesn't just materialize. You have to make sure that people are rewarded. People are told up front what is the expectation, and the strategic plan outlined that for everybody. So when those people deliver beyond their normal range, you need to reward them. And that's where the bonuses come. The bonuses are not given by the Vice Chancellor. These are bonuses that are given by the staff review committee. Now normally organizations give one bonus, but that doesn't really produce your stars. So if you have people who have really worked very hard, you give them 2 or 3 bonuses. That's how you build your stars. That's how you build your leaders for the future who can succeed other people. So we were driven by the motivation to really strengthen the culture of excellence at USP. Now, I had no personal benefit from it whatsoever. But I wanted to make sure that USP became a high-performing culture, and that is why it's important to reward them.
And in your opinion, you've done whatever was necessary to achieve those goals of the university.
Yes, and everybody can see that, because at the end of 2018, the university had 27 international accreditations. All of them were achieved during my term. All of them were achieved as a result of precisely these decisions. Mm-hmm. We had American accreditation, mm-hmm. which is a huge accreditation for the university. We had very sound finances. We had increasing student enrollment that reached 32,000 by that time. We had very good aid relationship.
So if all of these things were seen so positively, we'd like to now get into sort of the reasons as to why Professor Ahluwalia found so many discrepancies.
Mm-hmm. I suppose since you've already explained the rationale behind all the extraordinary complexities with finding and retaining some excellent, shall we say, leaders, let's look at why you think Professor Ahluwalia had an issue with these appointments, given that you said he oversaw some of the appointments that were made.
Well, I think, though, I cannot speak for him. And I think on the ones that he was part of, I think you should ask him, because normally what would happen is that if we take part in a decision and you agree with those decisions, then it's disingenuous to complain about precisely that.
Just on that note, though, we would like to mention that we had extended an invitation to the USP and for Professor Ahluwalia or anyone else from the USP, a representative, to come on. However, at the time of this show going to air, we did not get any positive feedback on whether or not we'd have a USP representative come on.
But as it is, when he did his own investigations, I'm guessing he spoke to people, and he in the time that he was in office, he carried out his own investigation. He reached certain conclusions. Did he at any point raise these concerns with you personally on a professional manner?
Well, those 11 pages came to me as a total surprise. And frankly, the question is, you've got the university riding so high, and it's not just me. You had external reviewers saying that. We had WASC that was congratulating the leadership. It was congratulating the university on its governance and management. USP was seen by the regional organizations as the model they were emulating. So I cannot see how a person comes in with really no experience of having run a university, not even having been a substantive long-term DVC, and having no real knowledge of USP's complexity, because I want to dwell on that. USP is not like another university with one campus. Or the ability to check and discuss, and I'm absolutely certain that if he had discussed with his senior team who had been there a lot longer than him, then he wouldn't have written those kinds of things. So I'm not sure where that is coming from.
You mentioned this issue of complexity in USP's unique complexity, even in your opinion piece. So could you expound on that and tell us what it is that you would like to, impart with the phrase USP's unique complexity? But we'll do that when we come back from another break in our final segment. So in our final segment, let's wrap up some of our discussions and this mention of USP's unique complexity that, in your opinion, Professor Ahluwalia fails to understand. What is it?
Well, for one thing, it is a regional university that is owned by 12 countries, and that brings a whole deal of complexity in dealing with 12 countries, different politics, different expectations. It has 14 campuses, so it's very unlike a university with a single campus. More than half of the students are studying by distance, so that is a very different business to the ones that he has been used to. And then you're working with a very devolved administration, because some countries like Niue and like Tokelau, you'd have to take boats to get there. So in order to deal with all of that, you've got to adopt a framework in which you are continuously improving and checking. Of course, at any one time, it won't be, whatever you want it. You can make Laudala more like how it should be running, then you go to the other countries. So those are complexities. Then it's complicated by the fact that USP is also a regional organization. And I would say about 15 to 20% of the Vice Chancellor's time goes into being a partner with the Foreign Secretariat and all the crop agencies and delivering those responsibilities that are allocated to you. And you have to deal with constantly changing environment in the Pacific. Culture is very important. So all of those, I've spent my lifetime as a student and then researching and writing and administering. And even now, we don't quite understand why all these things happen. So I think that for a new person coming in and to be able to contradict all of the agreements, what's in assessments, what's in the annual plan, what is being said by far more knowledgeable people, what is being said by the external reviewers, is beyond me.
So very quickly, in light of what you've just said, what would you say in terms of prioritizing succession planning during your term so that the incoming VC would have a more better understanding of how it works?
All of these issues taken into consideration holistically, like you've finished your term, in terms of the finances that you've referred to earlier, in terms of the BDO report and what it says about USP's framework, the unfilled positions and the policy framework in general. Do you think that you've left USP in a better way than what it can be? Are you satisfied with the way that you've left USP?
Well, I think if you remember where USP was when Professor Tal left, USP was functioning without approved budget, had deficits, had increasing, declining enrollment. The university was full of scandals. When you look at USP in 2018, it's a completely different world. It was riding high internationally. People wanted to link with USP. Governments were committed. They signed a new agreement called the USP agreement to emphasize their ownership. We brought in $500 million from aid. Now, that reflects the strength of the university. So I would say that the 10 years that I led the university delivered extraordinary results, and basically it's for others to try and match that. Now, did I feel everything had been done? No, because work is never completed. Did I feel that the positions were filled? No, because clearly some of them we could not fill. But do I feel that the incoming Vice Chancellor is doing anything to improve on that? That is a question for people to ask, because he has not advertised the Vice President's position that he complained about. He has not advertised the Deputy Vice Chancellor Education position. He is going to leave at the end of the year. He has not advertised the FBE deanship. He has not advertised the Fale deanship. So, who is doing better? I think that when history is looked at with objective facts, they'll realize that the senior management of the previous administration did extraordinary amount of work. They were hard-working visionary people. They delivered results that you can measure, and the university should be, proud and grateful for that.
I think that's a good note to end the show on. Unfortunately, Professor Chandra, that's all we have time for. So this show was important for you personally in order to reinforce your assertion that the report vindicates you and all of the alleged beneficiaries of the abuse and mismanagement. Thank you, and unfortunately, that's all we have time for you tonight on the show. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.